The bullet entered the king's neck at 5:20 p.m. He died instantly. His son drew a revolver and fired 4 shots at the assassin, then took a bullet through the face that exited from the top of his skull. He died 20 minutes later. Possibly a king for those 20 minutes, never speaking a word. His mother fought the killers with a bouquet of flowers. His 18-year-old brother, bleeding from a gunshot wound to the arm, crouched over his father's corpse and inherited a throne that didn't want him. He lost it in 26 months. The Queen spent 40 years begging to return to Portugal. They wouldn't let her. The boy king fled on a yacht, spent 22 years cataloguing books in England, then died suddenly at 42 from his throat swelling shut. So suddenly that Scotland Yard suspected assassination, though they never proved it. And here's what makes it worse. 22,000 people attended the assassins' funerals, calling them benefactors of the nation. Photographs of their bullet-riddled corpses sold in the streets like postcards. The dynasty that had ruled for 270 years, that had survived Napoleon and civil wars and national bankruptcy, collapsed because one man stepped from behind a carriage with a Winchester rifle, serial number 2137, and fired twice in 60 seconds. This is what happened to the last royal family of Portugal, and why their story proves that a crown inherited in blood is almost impossible to keep. It is late afternoon on February 1st, 1908. The winter sun hangs low over Lisbon's Terreiro de Passo, the grandest square in Portugal, flanked by gold-painted arcades and open to the Tagus River. An open horse-drawn landau crosses the square at walking pace. Inside sit King Carlos I of Portugal, his wife, Queen Amélie, their elder son, Crown Prince Luís Felipe, and their youngest, 18-year-old Prince Manuel. They are returning from a hunting holiday at the family's ancestral palace in Vila Viçosa. The king wears his blue general's uniform. The queen holds a bouquet of flowers. A single mounted cavalry officer rides alongside. This is the only security for the ruler of an empire that stretches from Lisbon to Angola, Mozambique, Goa, Macau, and Timor. The House of Braganza has ruled Portugal for 270 years. Carlos is the 34th king of an unbroken line stretching back to 1143. His family commands palaces, colonies, and a treasury of diamonds and gold. But within 60 seconds, everything will change. The bullet that kills a king will also create one. For exactly 20 minutes. The crown prince, groomed since birth to wear the crown, will die before he can speak a single word as sovereign. And the second son, the one who wanted to be a naval officer, who loved Beethoven and old books, will inherit a kingdom that no longer wants him. The House of Braganza was not born on a throne. It was born in rebellion. On December 1st, 1640, João, the 8th Duke of Braganza, was acclaimed King João IV of Portugal, overthrowing 60 years of Spanish Habsburg rule. His wife, Luisa de Guzman, reportedly told him she would rather be queen for a day than duchess for a lifetime. Spain did not recognize Portugal's independence until 1668, but the Braganzas held, and they would rule Portugal and later Brazil for the next 270 years. The dynasty's arc traced the fortunes of the empire itself. João V presided over a golden age fueled by Brazilian gold, building the colossal Mafra Palace with its 1,200 rooms. José I rebuilt Lisbon after the catastrophic earthquake of 1755, under the iron hand of the Marquis of Pombal. Maria, the Esther, became Portugal's first queen before succumbing to madness. João VI fled to Brazil during Napoleon's invasions and did not return until 1821, and then the family tore itself apart. When João VI died in 1826, his elder son Pedro, Emperor of Brazil, championed a liberal constitution. His younger son Miguel championed absolute monarchy. The result was civil war. The liberal wars raged from 1828 to 1834, ending with Miguel's defeat and exile at the Convention of Evora Monte. Miguel and all his descendants were banished from Portugal upon pain of immediate death. That sentence would not be lifted for over a century. And when it finally was, the consequences would reshape the entire Braganza succession. The royal children grew up in a world of protocol, expectation, and privilege that masked the rot beneath. Louis Philippe, born in 1887, was the focus of dynastic hope from birth, the heir who would continue the Braganza line into the 20th century. He was given a military education under Mousinho de Albuquerque, the legendary colonial officer who had captured the last king of Gaza in Mozambique. By 17, Louis Philippe was attending council meetings. By 20, he had acted as regent while his father travelled abroad. Marriage negotiations with Princess Patricia of Connaught, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, were underway, an alliance that would have bound the Braganzas even closer to the British crown. Manuel, the second son, followed a different path entirely. Where Louis Philippe was shaped for the throne, Manuel was shaped for the sea. He entered the naval school in 1907. He was bookish, musical, private. He collected rare manuscripts. He played the piano. In the hierarchy of royal destiny, he was the spare, free to pursue his own interests, precisely because no one expected him to rule. By the late 1800s, Portugal was in crisis. The British ultimatum of 1890, demanding Portugal withdraw from territories between Angola and Mozambique, humiliated the nation and became a rallying cry for republicans. Portugal declared bankruptcy in 1892 and again in 1902. The traditional political parties were fragmenting. The Portuguese Republican Party was gaining support in Lisbon, Porto, and the military. And then came King Carlos I. Carlos was not a foolish man. Born in 1863 at the Ajuda Palace, he was an accomplished painter, a serious oceanographer who published scientific studies, a personal friend of King Edward VII of England. But he was politically disastrous. In desperation, he appointed João Franco as Prime Minister in 1906. Franco dissolved Parliament and governed as a dictator from May 1907, ruling by decree, suppressing the press, persecuting Republicans. Then the Arianamento scandal broke. Unauthorized transfers of public funds to the royal household. It emerged that Carlos had used state money to buy houses for mistresses. Republican deputy Afonso Costa stood in Parliament and declared that, for far fewer crimes than those committed by Carlos, the head of Louis XVI had rolled from the scaffold. The king was now openly called a thief and a criminal. When a failed Republican coup was crushed on January 28, 1908, Franco presented Carlos with a decree allowing deportation of political prisoners without trial. Carlos reportedly signed it and said, "I sign my sentence of death, but you gentlemen want it that way." He had 4 days to live. The royal family had been at the ducal palace of Villa Viçosa, the ancestral Braganza seat in the Alentejo, on a hunting holiday. On February 1st, they travelled by royal train to Barreiro, crossed the Tagus by steamer, and disembarked at the Cais de Sodré in central Lisbon at approximately 5 in the afternoon. They were met by Prime Minister Franco. They transferred to an open landau with minimal security. A single mounted cavalry officer, Lieutenant Francisco Figueira Frois, and began crossing the Terreiro do Passo toward the Necesidades Palace. In the carriage sat King Carlos I, age 44, Queen Amélie, age 42, Crown Prince Luis Philippe, age 20, and Prince Manuel, age 18. But no throne is ever truly secure, and the men waiting in the crowd that afternoon had come to prove it. At approximately 5:20 in the evening, Manuel Buissa, a 32-year-old former army sergeant, expert marksman, and schoolteacher, stepped from behind the carriage roughly 8 meters away. He knelt. He raised a Winchester 1907 semi-automatic carbine, serial number 2137. His first shot struck Carlos in the neck. The king died instantly. A second round clipped the king's shoulder and his body slumped to the right. Alfredo Luis Costa, a 24-year-old radical Republican, jumped onto the carriage step and fired 2 more shots into the king's body. Queen Amélie stood, She struck at Costa with her bouquet of flowers, her only weapon, screaming, "Infame! Infame!" Crown Prince Louis Philippe drew a concealed revolver and fired 4 rapid shots at Costa, fracturing his left arm and sending him tumbling from the carriage. But by standing, the prince made himself a target. Buissa fired again. The bullets struck Louis Philippe in the face and exited from the top of his skull. Prince Manuel was shot in the arm. The Queen was physically unharmed. Both assassins were killed within approximately 1 minute. Buissa by police gunfire, Costa by sabre and bullet. An innocent bystander, João Sabino dos Santos, was mistakenly identified as a third assassin and also killed. The coachman drove the carriage at full speed to the Royal Naval Arsenal. Carlos was confirmed dead on arrival. Louis Philippe died approximately 20 minutes later in the Arsenal infirmary, never regaining consciousness. When the king's mother, Queen Mother Maria Pia, arrived and cried in French, "On a tué mon fils," Amélie replied, "Et le mien aussi." Both assassins were members of the Carbonaria, the secret Republican Revolutionary Society that by 1910 counted approximately 40,000 members. Buissa had written his will 4 days before the attack. This was not random violence, it was organized political assassination. And the Portuguese public's response told the entire story. Photographs of the assassins' corpses were sold in the streets. A procession of 22,000 people later visited their graves, calling them benefactors of the nation. The monarchy had not just lost its king, it had lost the people. Crown Prince Louis, full name Luis Felipe Maria Carlos Amelio Fernando Victor Manuel Antonio Lorenzo Miguel Rafael Gabriel Gonzaga Xavier Francisco de Assis Bento, had been groomed for the throne from the day he was born on March 21st, 1887, at the Ajuda Palace. He was educated by Mocenior de Albuquerque, one of Portugal's greatest colonial military heroes. Luis Felipe had acted as regent in 1907 while his father travelled. He had made the first royal visit to Portugal's African colonies. Marriage negotiations with Princess Patricia of Connaught, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, were underway. Some genealogists have referred to him as King Louis III, since technically he succeeded his father the instant Carlos died. If Carlos was killed first, and all evidence indicates he was, then Luis Philippe was, for perhaps 20 minutes, the King of Portugal while lying unconscious on a stretcher in the naval arsenal. Portuguese constitutional law required formal proclamation. Luis Felipe was never proclaimed. Most historians do not count him among the kings of Portugal. But the detail haunts the story. A prince prepared his entire life for the crown, who may have worn it for 20 minutes without knowing, and died before he could speak a single word as sovereign. He had been described by those who knew him as charming, brave, and popular with the people in a way that his father never was. Some monarchists later speculated that had Luis Felipe survived and Carlos been the only casualty, the young prince might have saved the dynasty. He had the temperament, the training, the public goodwill. But that is the cruelest kind of history, the kind that invites you to imagine a future that never happened. He was buried at the monastery of São Vicente de Fora in Lisbon, in the pantheon of the House of Braganza. He was 20 years old. His younger brother, who had never been prepared to rule, inherited everything. Manuel Maria Felipe Carlos Amelio Luis Miguel Rafael Gabriel Gonzaga Francisco de Assis Eugenio de Saxe-Coburgo Gotha y Braganza was born on November 15, 1889, at the Palace of Belém. He was the second son. He held the title Duke of Beja from birth. He was never expected to become king. While Luis Philippe received intensive political and military preparation, Manuel pursued intellectual interests. He was fluent in French and English by age 6. He loved literature, Beethoven, Wagner. In 1907, he entered the Portuguese Naval School, planning a career at sea. Within a year, he would be the youngest reigning monarch in Europe. At 18 years and 2.5 months old, Manuel II inherited a throne soaked in his father's blood. His very first act was to dismiss João Franco and his entire cabinet, blaming the dictator's authoritarianism for the tragedy. He declared he would reign but not govern, deliberately limiting royal intervention in politics to avoid repeating his father's catastrophic mistake of partisan rule. He appointed Admiral Francisco Joaquim Ferreira do Amaral to lead a unity government. He toured the country, Porto, Braga, Coimbra, Guimarães, abandoned court protocols, opened direct dialogue with Republican leaders. He invited a French sociologist to examine Portugal's social conditions. He attempted to split the Socialist Party away from the Republicans. He pursued a pro-British foreign policy and was appointed Knight of the Order of the Garter in November 1909. But the political situation was hopeless. 7 governments rose and fell in 26 months. The monarchist parties were fragmented beyond repair, alternately advising the young king and blaming him for taking their advice. The Republican journalist João Chagas warned him, "Your Highness arrives too young into a very old world." At the Republican Party's Setúbal Congress in April 1909, the revolutionary faction won a mandate to seize power by force. The death of Edward VII in May 1910 removed Manuel's most important international protector. 14 Republican deputies won seats in the August elections. The clock was running out. On the evening of October 3, 1910, Manuel attended a state dinner at the Necessidades Palace for visiting Brazilian President-elect Hermes da Fonseca. That same day, the prominent Republican physician Miguel Bombarda was shot dead by a deranged patient. Republicans blamed a monarchist clerical conspiracy. That night, Carbonaria members and rebel soldiers seized military barracks across Lisbon. In the harbour, mutinied crews took control of 3 warships: the cruisers Adamastor, São Rafael, and D. Carlos I. Admiral Candido dos Reis, misinformed that the revolution had failed, committed suicide. He never learned it would succeed. On October 4th, the warships turned their guns on the Necessidades Palace itself. Shells struck the exterior and interior. One reached the king's private quarters on the 1st floor. Manuel initially refused to flee. When his prime minister phoned urging escape, he responded, "Go if you want. I'm staying. Since the Constitution doesn't appoint me any role other than of letting myself be killed, I will abide by it." But by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he relented. He left by car for Mafra. His mother, Amélie, and grandmother, Maria Pia, were summoned from Sintra. The royal yacht Amélia anchored off Ericeira, and the family departed from the Praia dos Pescadores in 2 rowing boats. At 9 o'clock in the morning on October 5, 1910, José Relvas proclaimed the Portuguese Republic from the balcony of Lisbon City Hall. Manuel wanted to sail north to Porto to organize resistance. The ship's officers refused. Porto had already joined the Republican cause. The yacht sailed to Gibraltar, where Manuel ordered it return to Lisbon as state property. He was 20 years old. He would never see Portugal again. The provisional government moved fast. President Teófilo Braga and Justice Minister Afonso Costa, the same man who had compared Carlos to Louis XVI, expelled the Jesuits within days, suppressed all religious orders, confiscated church property, legalized divorce, and abolished every noble title in Portugal. The Braganza palaces were nationalized, the royal collections were seized. Brazil was the first nation to recognize the Republic. Britain followed. The monarchy that had endured for nearly 8 centuries through the Reconquista, the Age of Discovery, the Inquisition, the Napoleonic Wars, and 2 national bankruptcies, was finished. Manuel arrived in England in October 1910. He first settled at Abercorn House in Richmond, then purchased Fulwell Park in Twickenham in 1913, a Georgian mansion on approximately 50 acres with a 9-hole golf course, tennis courts, and gardens running down to the River Crane. He had a curious aversion to the colour blue and redecorated the entire house without it. The streets around the property still carry his memory: Manuel Road, Lisbon Avenue, Augusta Road, Portugal Gardens. He became a familiar figure in the community, attending St. James's Catholic Church in Twickenham, donating a stained glass window bearing the Braganza crest in 1932, becoming godfather to local children, attending Wimbledon every year. He was by all accounts a kind and modest man, qualities that would have made him a decent constitutional monarch if the constitution had survived long enough to let him try. On September 4th, 1913, he married Augusta Victoria of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen at Sigmaringen Castle in Germany. Augusta Victoria, born August 19, 1890, was the daughter of Wilhelm, Prince of Hohenzollern, whose mother was a sister of Empress Elizabeth of Austria. The couple were second cousins, both great-grandchildren of Queen Maria II and King Ferdinand II of Portugal. Her father provided a $200,000 dowry. The marriage produced no children. The Braganza-Coburg line would die with Manuel. During World War I, the couple occupied an awkward position. Augusta Victoria was a German Hohenzollern, while Portugal fought alongside Britain. Manuel threw himself into the war effort regardless, serving with the British Red Cross, establishing a convalescent home for officers in Brighton at his own expense, running the orthopaedic department at Shepherd's Bush Hospital until 1925. King George V invited him to share the victory podium during the 1919 peace celebrations. His most enduring legacy was scholarly. Over the course of his exile, Manuel compiled Livros Antigos Portugueses, 1489 to 1600, a monumental 3-volume bibliography of early Portuguese printed books published by Cambridge University Press. It was far more than a catalogue. He wrote biographical notes on every author, historical essays, included facsimile reproductions in Portuguese and English. Volume 1 appeared in 1929. Volume 2 followed during his lifetime. Volume 3 was published posthumously in 1935. A special edition of only 45 numbered copies was produced. Manuel personally delivered one copy to King George V at Windsor and another to Pope Pius XI at the Vatican. His bust was later placed in the entrance of the National Library in Lisbon. The king who lost his country had given it back something permanent. Among monarchists, Manuel insisted that restoration should come only through legal and electoral means, never by force. He did not sanction the ill-fated Monarchy of the North in January 1919, when monarchists briefly seized Porto before being crushed. He quietly supported Salazar in the early 1930s and on at least one occasion helped the Republic diplomatically. When Britain refused to recognize a new Portuguese ambassador after the 1926 military coup, Manuel used his personal connections at the British court to resolve the dispute. A deposed king helping the government that had deposed him because it served Portugal. That was the kind of man he had become. On July 1st, 1932, Manuel attended Wimbledon and played tennis. He appeared to be in excellent health. The following day, July 2nd, he developed a sore throat. A doctor was called. Manuel died suddenly at Fulwell Park, age 42, from suffocation caused by acute edema of the glottis, an abnormal swelling of the larynx that closed his airway. Given his apparent perfect health hours before, his death has been regarded as suspicious by some historians, though no evidence of foul play was ever established. The previous year, a Scotland Yard Special Branch officer had discovered a carbonaria agent on the grounds of Fulwell Park. A requiem mass was held at Westminster Cathedral. His body was then transferred to Lisbon aboard HMS Concord, arriving on August 2nd, 1932. The coffin was received at the Praça do Comércio, the same square where his father and brother had been murdered 24 years earlier. He was interred at the monastery of São Vicente de Fora, beside Carlos and Luís Felipe. In his 1915 will, he had asked that all his possessions be transferred to the Portuguese state and that he be buried in Portugal. Both wishes were honoured. Queen Amélie, Marie Amélie Louise Hélène d'Orléans, was born on September 28, 1865, at York House, Twickenham, England. She was the eldest daughter of Philippe, Count of Paris, the Orleanist pretender to the French throne, and grandson of King Louis-Philippe I. Born into one exiled royal family, she would marry into another that would also be exiled. And the place of her birth, Twickenham, would become the place of her son's exile. History has a taste for such symmetry. She married Carlos on May 22, 1886, at the church of São Domingos in Lisbon. The engagement party her father threw in Paris was so extravagant, over 2,000 carriages in attendance, that the French Republican government expelled the Orléans family from the country yet again, with 10,000 citizens waving goodbye at the railway station. As Queen of Portugal, Amélie threw herself into public life with an energy that the Braganzas had rarely shown. She learned fluent Portuguese. She founded the National Assistance for Tuberculosis in 1899, at a time when the disease was devastating the country's poor. She established Portugal's Pasteur Institute. She created the National Coach Museum in 1905, still one of Lisbon's most popular museums, housing the finest collection of historical coaches in the world. Pope Leo XIII awarded her the Golden Rose in 1892, the papacy's highest honour for a Catholic woman. She was by most accounts the most active and popular member of the royal family in the final decades of the monarchy, more admired than her husband, more visible than any queen consort before her. In the square that afternoon in February, she had tried to save her family with the only weapon she had, a bouquet of flowers. She failed. Her husband was dead, her eldest son was dying, and within 2 years, her surviving son would lose the throne. After the revolution, Amélie initially settled in Twickenham with Manuel. When he married in 1913, she eventually moved to France, purchasing the Château de Bellevue in Le Vésinet, near Versailles in 1921. She served with the French Red Cross during World War I and was decorated by King George V. She lived at Bellevue for 30 years. When German soldiers occupied her home in 1940, and the Portuguese dictator Salazar invited her to take refuge in Portugal, she refused. "In my misfortune, France welcomed me," she said. "I will not abandon her in her misfortune." She stayed through the occupation. She stayed through the liberation. She did not leave. She visited Portugal for the last time in May and June of 1945. She made a pilgrimage to Fatima. She visited the tombs of her husband and sons at São Vicente de Fora. She wept at the Palace of Penha in Sintra, where she had spent summers with Carlos and the children. In 1949, at Salazar's request, she bequeathed all her Portuguese assets to her godson, the young Duarte Pio de Bragança. Amélie died on October 25, 1951, at the Château de Bellevue. She was 86 years old. Among her reported last words, "I suffer so much. God is with me. Goodbye, take me to Portugal." She received a state funeral. Her remains were transported to Lisbon aboard the Portuguese frigate Bartolomeu Dias, greeted by 21 cannon shots. She was buried at the monastery of São Vicente de Fora, beside her husband and both her sons. She had been born in Twickenham, fled to Twickenham, died in France begging to return to Portugal. A woman who belonged to 3 countries and was never truly at home in any of them. Manuel II died without children. The constitutional Braganza-Coburg line was extinct. The succession question had been partially addressed through 2 disputed private agreements, the Pact of Dover in 1912 and the Pact of Paris in 1922, but their precise terms remain debated by historians. What is clear is that the claim passed to the formerly banished Miguelis branch, the very line that had been exiled upon pain of immediate death at the Convention of Évora-Monte in 1834. It is one of the great ironies of Portuguese history. The branch of the family that the victorious liberals had tried to erase permanently from the succession was now the only branch left. Duarte Nuno, born on September 23, 1907, at Siebenstein Castle in Austria, reportedly with Portuguese soil placed beneath the birthbed by special permission of Emperor Franz Joseph, became the Miguelist pretender in 1920. Queen Amélie received him in Paris and gave him her blessing. In 1942, he married Princess Maria Francisca of Orleans-Braganza, a great-granddaughter of Emperor Pedro II of Brazil, symbolically reuniting the feuding liberal and absolutist branches that had gone to war over a century earlier. On May 27, 1950, the Portuguese National Assembly repealed the banishment laws of 1834 and 1910. The Braganzas could finally return. Duarte Nuno's family moved to Portugal in 1952. Salazar briefly considered restoring the monarchy in a ceremonial role after President Carmona died in 1951, but decided against it. Duarte Nuno died on December 24, 1976. His son, Duarte Pio, is the current head of the Royal House of Portugal. Born on May 15, 1945, in Bern, Switzerland, his godparents were Pope Pius XII and Queen Amélie herself. Through both his parents, he descends from the two brothers who tore the dynasty apart, Pedro IV and Miguel I, reuniting in his blood the split that had shaped Portuguese history for over a century. He served as a helicopter pilot in the Portuguese Air Force during the Angolan War from 1968 to 1971. He became a campaigner for East Timor independence and holds East Timorese citizenship. On May 13, 1995, he married Isabel Inés de Castro Covello de Heredia at the Jerónimos Monastery in Lisbon, the first royal wedding in Portugal since 1886. The ceremony was attended by the President, the Prime Minister, and royals from across Europe. They have 3 children: Afonso, Prince of Beira, born in 1996, Infanta Maria Francisca, born in 1997, who married in October 2023 at Mafra Palace, and Infante Dinis, Duke of Porto, born in 1999. Duarte Pio advocates a constitutional monarchy within the framework of the existing republic. The People's Monarchist Party, founded in 1974, has never won more than 3% of the vote. Polls suggest that somewhere between 20% and 30% of Portuguese citizens would prefer a king to an elected president. But Portugal's republic is now over 115 years old. Restoration is not a realistic prospect. The Braganzas persist not as rulers, but as custodians of memory. The Ducal Palace of Vila Viçosa, the ancestral Braganza seat, the place where Carlos and his family spent their last peaceful days before that February afternoon in 1908, is now managed by the foundation of the House of Braganza. Established in 1933, according to Manuel's final wishes, it houses his extraordinary library of early Portuguese books, including a first edition of Camões's Os Lusíadas. Its archives hold approximately 200,000 documents and 40,000 photographs. The Necessidades Palace, whose walls still bear the scars of the 1910 bombardment, serves as the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Palace of Belém, where Manuel was born, is the official residence of the President of the Republic. The Ajuda Palace opened a new Royal Treasure Museum in June 2022, displaying over 1,000 pieces, including crowns, scepters, and more than 22,000 gems. The possessions of a dynasty that lost everything except the things that could be locked behind glass. And in Twickenham, where Manuel spent 22 years cataloguing Portuguese books in a Georgian mansion he would never truly call home, the house itself is gone, demolished decades ago, replaced by suburban streets. But the names remain: Manuel Road, Lisbon Avenue, Augusta Road, Portugal Gardens. Faint marks on a map, left behind by a king who lost his country at 20, spent his life trying to serve it from a distance, and asked only that when it was over, they would take him home.